Did Star Wars accidentally create the most shameless copycat wave in movie history? The moment George Lucas changed cinema, studios around the world smelled money. And some did not just borrow the idea, they practically chased it through space with cardboard helmets, stolen footage, bargain bin droids, and laser swords with no shame. Today, we're counting down 15 Star Wars knockoffs that went so far. Some became more infamous than the movies they copied. Number 15. Laser Blast, 1978. This one did not just ride the Star Wars wave, it fired a cheap laser straight at it. Released in 1978, only 1 year after Star Wars changed Hollywood forever, Laser Blast was a strange little sci-fi horror film about a troubled young man who discovers an alien weapon and slowly turns into something dangerous. On paper, it sounds more like a monster movie than a space opera. But the reason it earns a place on this list is because it clearly knew exactly what cultural giant it was standing beside. The most famous moment comes when the main character blasts a Star Wars billboard, almost like the movie is openly admitting its jealousy. That scene feels less like a joke and more like a confession. Low-budget filmmakers saw Star Wars making history, and suddenly everyone wanted lasers, aliens, glowing weapons, and rebellious teenage energy. Laser Blast did not copy the full plot, but it captured the attitude of the era. If audiences wanted space fantasy, give them anything with a ray gun. It is messy, cheap, and bizarre, but that is exactly why it matters. Laser Blast feels like the first warning sign that after Star Wars, every low-budget studio wanted a piece of the galaxy. Number 14. Cosmos, War of the Planets, 1977. Before the Star Wars imitation wave became shameless, Cosmos, War of the Planets helped prove how fast cheap space cinema could chase a trend. Released in 1977, this Italian sci-fi film throws viewers into a future filled with strange planets, cosmic danger, stiff uniforms, awkward technology, and a mystery involving a powerful alien intelligence. It does not copy Star Wars scene by scene, but it absolutely belongs to the same low-budget space opera rush that exploded after audiences became obsessed with galaxies, starships, and interplanetary adventure. What makes this film useful for the list is its raw exploitation energy. Director Alfonso Brescia became closely associated with several Italian space adventures from this period, and films like this helped build the world of cheap space-exploitation cinema. The sets are modest, the effects are rough, and the atmosphere feels more like a television studio pretending to be deep space. But that is exactly the charm and the problem. Cosmos. War of the Planets feels like a film made by people who understood that the public suddenly wanted space, even if they could not afford the magic. It is not the most famous copycat, but it is a perfect early warning sign. After Star Wars, every producer wanted a galaxy, even if all they had was cardboard and ambition. Number 13. War of the Robots, 1978. If Star Wars gave the world lovable robots and cosmic adventure, War of the Robots answered with bargain bin machines and a galaxy held together by pure nerve. Released in 1978, this Italian production arrived right in the middle of the post-Star Wars gold rush, when low-budget studios realized science fiction suddenly looked profitable again. The film features space missions, robotic threats, futuristic costumes, alien worlds, and dramatic danger that tries to feel much bigger than the budget behind it. The plot involves a mission to rescue kidnapped scientists, but the real hook is the film's atmosphere. Everything feels like a fast response to the new commercial hunger for laser-filled space stories. The robots are not sleek. The effects are not elegant. The production does not have the sweep of Star Wars, but it has that urgent copycat confidence that defined so many films of the era. Move quickly, add robots, add spaceships, add cosmic stakes, and hope audiences do not look too closely. War of the Robots works better than Star Raiders because it comes from the exact European space-exploitation wave that Star Wars helped energize. It is not polished enough to compete, but it is shameless enough to remember. This is what happens when a global blockbuster does not just inspire art, it creates a factory line. Number 12. The Shape of Things to Come, 1979. Nothing says respectable science fiction like hiding behind a famous author while chasing a billion-dollar trend. Released in 1979, The Shape of Things to Come used the name of H.G. Wells to give itself a touch of literary importance, but the timing tells a much louder story. This was the late 70s, and after Star Wars, futuristic movies suddenly needed robots, space colonies, laser battles, villainous threats, and a sense that the universe was one big playground for adventure. The film takes place in a future where humanity has moved beyond Earth, but instead of feeling like a serious, Wells-inspired warning, much of it feels like a low-budget attempt to join the new space opera gold rush. The costumes, effects, and dramatic stakes all carry that post-Star Wars smell, bigger worlds, louder conflicts, and a desperate need to look expensive. What makes this one stand out is the contrast between ambition and execution. It wants to feel grand, intelligent, and futuristic, but it often looks like a studio trying to disguise a copycat under a classic title. The result is not exactly plagiarism. It is something sneakier. Prestige clothing wrapped around a cash-in skeleton. Number 11. Space Mutiny, 1988. By the time Space Mutiny arrived, the copycat machine was not just borrowing ideas, it was recycling space itself. Released in 1988, this infamous low-budget sci-fi film has become legendary for all the wrong reasons. It has clunky action, stiff performances, cheap sets, and the kind of futuristic world that feels trapped inside a warehouse. But its most notorious detail is the allegation that it reused visual effects shots from Battlestar Galactica. That makes Space Mutiny especially funny in this countdown. Battlestar Galactica had already faced legal controversy over its similarities to Star Wars, and then Space Mutiny came along and appeared to borrow from Battlestar. In other words, this was not just a Star Wars echo, it was an echo of an echo, bouncing through the cheapest corners of science fiction. The story itself follows rebellion, betrayal, and space conflict aboard a massive ship, which sounds exciting until you see how little money seems to have made it onto the screen. Still, Space Mutiny has value as a time capsule. It shows how the Star Wars effect kept spreading for more than a decade, until even the copies had copies. That is not cinema history, that is cinematic cloning gone wrong. Number 10. Star Odyssey, 1979. If Star Wars was a polished space opera, Star Odyssey was the bargain bin version sold from the back of a rocket. Released in 1979, this Italian sci-fi adventure is one of the clearest examples of how European exploitation cinema reacted to the Star Wars explosion. The ingredients are impossible to miss. Evil galactic forces, heroic rebels, strange planets, cheap laser weapons, and droids that feel like someone saw C-3PO and R2-D2 once, then tried to rebuild them from memory. What makes Star Odyssey so entertaining is how shamelessly it chases scale. It wants to feel massive. It wants the audience to believe entire worlds are at stake. But everything on screen has that wonderful low-budget stiffness, plastic costumes, awkward effects, dramatic speeches, and space battles that feel more enthusiastic than convincing. Still, that is exactly why it has survived in cult discussions. Star Odyssey is not memorable because it beat Star Wars. It is memorable because it tried so hard while having so little. It represents the global scramble after George Lucas proved space fantasy could print money. And in that scramble, some filmmakers did not ask, "Can we create something new?" They asked, "How fast can we launch our own galaxy?" Number 9. The Humanoid, 1979. This movie did not just follow the Star Wars blueprint, it walked behind it wearing a fake helmet and hoping nobody noticed. Released in 1979, The Humanoid is one of Italy's most obvious attempts to cash in on the sudden hunger for space fantasy. The film throws viewers into a galaxy filled with evil rulers, strange planets, robotic side characters, futuristic battles, and a dark villain presence that clearly understands the power of the Darth Vader image. The plot centers on a peaceful pilot who is transformed into a powerful, controlled warrior by a villainous force. That idea gives the film a slightly different angle, but everything around it feels built from the same commercial dream. Audiences loved Star Wars, so give them space empires, laser fights, and cosmic danger as quickly as possible. The costumes look dramatic, the sets try to look grand, and the music pushes for epic emotion, even when the budget cannot fully support the illusion. What makes the Humanoid fascinating is not that it fooled anyone, it is that it tried so boldly. It feels like a film made by people who saw the future of cinema and decided the safest strategy was to copy the silhouette. It is clumsy, colorful, and deeply shameless, but as a Star Wars-era artifact, it is almost impossible to ignore. Number 8. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. Roger Corman saw Star Wars conquer the box office and answered with the most practical question in low-budget Hollywood. How cheaply can we build our own rebellion? Released in 1980, Battle Beyond the Stars is one of the most famous American attempts to turn the Star Wars craze into something fast, profitable, and loud. The film borrows its structure from The Seven Samurai, with a peaceful world recruiting warriors to defend itself from a powerful enemy. But the packaging is pure post-Star Wars space adventure. There are alien fighters, laser battles, colorful heroes, a threatening galactic villain, and a universe that wants to feel much larger than the production money behind it. What makes this one more interesting than many cheap knockoffs is that it actually has energy. It knows it is selling pulp entertainment, and it leans into that with strange designs, wild characters, and a comic book sense of danger. But let's be honest, this movie exists because Star Wars made space profitable again. It is less a stolen copy than a calculated market reaction, the kind of film made when producers smell money in the stars. Battle Beyond the Stars may not be the most shameless ripoff, but it is one of the smartest. It did not just copy the trend, it industrialized it. Number 7. Starchaser, The Legend of Orin, 1985. Some movies borrow inspiration. Starchaser looked at Star Wars and seemed to ask, can we animate the entire formula? Released in 1985, Starchaser, The Legend of Orin, is one of the most eye-raising animated space adventures of the 80s. It has a young hero trapped in a dark world, a mysterious sword-like weapon, robot companions, a rogue adventurer figure, a princess-style character, and an evil ruler controlling everything from above. If those pieces sound familiar, that is exactly why this film has followed by a reputation for being one of the boldest Star Wars-like animated films ever made. The story follows Orin, a young miner who discovers a powerful weapon and begins a journey beyond the underground world he has always known. That setup gives the film a mythic shape, but the shadow of Star Wars hangs over almost every major idea. The heroic awakening, the rebellion energy, the strange companions, even the balance between fantasy and science fiction feels suspiciously familiar. Still, Starchaser has its own strange charm. Its animation gives the world a different texture, and its darker moments make it feel more intense than a simple children's adventure. But the copycat DNA is impossible to deny. It is not just inspired by Star Wars, it feels like a parallel universe version drawn frame by frame. Number 6. Escape from Galaxy 3, 1981. Some movies copy the spaceship. This one copied the fantasy, the royalty, the rebels, and the cheap galaxy-sized drama. Released in 1981, Escape from Galaxy 3 is an Italian space opera adventure that feels like it was built entirely in the aftershock of Star Wars. It has a cruel galactic ruler, heroic fugitives, strange planets, laser battles, and a romantic fantasy tone that tries very hard to make its universe feel bigger than its budget. The story follows two survivors from a destroyed world who flee across space after an evil conqueror attacks their civilization. That setup instantly gives the film the kind of rebellion versus empire flavor that audiences had been trained to love after Star Wars. There are royal characters, cosmic danger, and enough low-budget spectacle to make the whole thing feel like a paperback sci-fi cover brought to life with glue, smoke, and ambition. What makes Escape from Galaxy 3 a better replacement here is that it fits the international knockoff wave without being a direct parody. It is not winking at Star Wars like a comedy. It is seriously trying to become its own grand space saga, and that makes the imitation feel even more shameless. It may not be famous, but it belongs in this countdown because it captures the exact hunger of the era. Everyone wanted their own empire, their own rebels, and their own galaxy. Number 5. Message from Space, 1978. Japan did not wait years to answer Star Wars. It fired back almost immediately with its own galaxy of princesses, warriors, and cosmic danger. Released in 1978, Message from Space is one of the most important international Star Wars-style films because it was not just a tiny cheap imitation. It was a major Japanese production built with ambition, spectacle, and a clear desire to capture the same space opera excitement that had suddenly taken over the world. The film features a white-clad princess-like figure, armored villains, heroic rebels, strange companions, and a mystical quest involving powerful objects sent across the galaxy. There are space battles, exotic planets, and adventure beats that feel carefully designed for audiences hungry for more laser-filled fantasy after Star Wars. Even the idea of mixing ancient legend with futuristic warfare makes it feel spiritually connected to George Lucas's formula. But what makes Message from Space stand out is that it does not feel lazy. It may be heavily influenced, but it has personality, color, and a uniquely Japanese sense of style. The effects are uneven, but the scale is impressive for the time, and the film feels like a country trying to prove it could create its own space myth. Still, the timing is impossible to ignore. This was not just inspiration. This was a fast, shiny international response to the Star Wars gold rush. Number 4. Star Crash, 1978. Star Crash did not tiptoe around the Star Wars craze. It sprinted straight into it wearing glitter, lasers, and absolutely no fear. Released in 1978, this Italian space opera is one of the most famous copycat films ever produced in the shadow of George Lucas's galaxy. It has an evil emperor, cosmic rebels, strange planets, robot companions, laser battles, and glowing sword-style weapons that make the influence almost impossible to miss. The film follows Stella Star, a space smuggler pulled into a mission involving galactic danger, royal power, and a villainous threat spreading across the universe. But the real story is not just on screen, it is in the timing. Star Wars had just changed the business of cinema, and Star Crash arrived like a neon-painted response from the world of exploitation filmmaking. It did not have the polish, emotional clarity, or technical magic of its inspiration, but it had confidence. Wild confidence. What makes Star Crash so watchable is that it almost becomes its own strange creature. The effects are clumsy, the dialogue is dramatic, and the whole film feels like Star Wars filtered through a fever dream. Yet that is exactly why fans still talk about it. Star Crash may not have copied the soul of Star Wars, but it definitely chased the money, the look, and the myth. And sometimes a knockoff becomes legendary not because it succeeds, but because it fails with unforgettable style. Number 3. The Black Hole, 1979. Disney did not copy Star Wars cheaply. It answered it expensively, seriously, and with one of the strangest space adventures of the decade. Released in 1979, The Black Hole was Disney's attempt to prove it could compete in the new blockbuster sci-fi era. After Star Wars turned space fantasy into a global obsession, every major studio wanted its own galaxy-sized event, and Disney built this one with robots, laser battles, a mysterious villain, a massive spaceship, and a dark cosmic threat pulling everything toward disaster. The story follows a crew that discovers the enormous lost ship Cygnus near a black hole, commanded by the eerie Dr. Hans Reinhardt. From the start, the film tries to create its own mythology, but the timing makes the influence impossible to ignore. Cute robots like V1 Cent and B.O.B. clearly existed in a world where audiences had fallen in love with R2-D2 and C-3PO. The sleek villain robot Maximilian gives the film its own dark mechanical menace, while the space battles and grand production design show Disney chasing the same audience that had made Star Wars unstoppable. What makes The Black Hole fascinating is that it is not a trashy knockoff. It is a polished studio response with a darker, weirder personality. But that may be why it belongs so high. It shows that Star Wars did not only inspire cheap imitators, it forced even Disney to look into space and ask, where is our empire? Number 2. The War in Space, 1977. Japan had not even fully finished absorbing Star Wars before the war in space blasted onto screens like a local answer to the new space craze. Released in 1977, this Japanese sci-fi adventure arrived during the same cinematic shockwave that made every studio rethink the commercial power of space fantasy. It features Earth under threat, heroic pilots, alien forces, explosive battles, and a giant starship called the Goten, a machine built to give audiences the same kind of grand, futuristic spectacle they were suddenly craving. The war in space is not a simple one-to-one copy of Star Wars, and that actually makes it more interesting. It also carries DNA from earlier Japanese tokusatsu, kaiju-era spectacle, and Toho's own science fiction tradition. But the timing and packaging make it impossible to separate from the Star Wars boom. Suddenly, space battles were not just nerd material, they were box office oxygen. What makes this entry stronger than Battlestar Galactica for your list is that it stays inside movie territory while keeping the international copycat angle alive. It shows how quickly the Star Wars effect spread beyond America. The result is loud, colorful, strange, and ambitious. Not banned, not legally destroyed, but clearly part of the same global race to make space adventure profitable before the audience moved on. Number 1. Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. By 1983, filmmakers were no longer just copying Star Wars. They were mixing its DNA with every other dirty, futuristic trend they could find. Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone is a perfect replacement for the top spot if you want an English-language, mainstream-friendly film instead of Turkish Star Wars. It brings together a rugged space hero, a dangerous wasteland planet, strange villains, rescue mission adventure, and a battered sci-fi world that feels like Star Wars crashed into Mad Max and crawled out covered in dust. The film follows Wolf, a bounty hunter-style adventurer who travels into a hostile zone to rescue kidnapped women from a brutal ruler. That setup gives it a very clear pulp sci-fi structure: lone hero, weird sidekick energy, hostile planet, villain's fortress, and constant danger. It does not steal footage or copy Star Wars directly, but it absolutely feeds on the same post-Lucas appetite for lived-in galaxies, outlaw heroes, and dangerous outer space frontiers. Space Hunter works because it feels more professionally made than many cheap knockoffs, but still carries the scent of imitation. It is not the most illegal entry, it is the most useful replacement if you want the countdown to end with an English-language cult film that viewers can understand instantly. It proves the Star Wars effect had matured by the 80s. The copies became slicker, dirtier, and harder to dismiss. And that is the strange legacy of Star Wars. It did not just inspire filmmakers, it tempted them. Some borrowed the mood, some copied the look, and some crossed the line so boldly they became legends for all the wrong reasons. So which knockoff was the most shameless? Drop your pick below and subscribe for more forgotten cinema scandals.